Hello, I'm Ron Strickland. This webcast is one of a series in which I'm providing some brief lectures and commentaries on topics from the courses I teach in literature and cultural studies. This particular installment is one of a series on William Shakespeare's play, Othello, the Moor of Venice. And I'm going to say something about the concept of metadrama and the function of Iago as a surrogate dramatist in the play. There's a kind of criticism that's been very common, which is to treat Shakespeare's characters as if they are real people, and to examine their motives and their actions and their flaws and their heroism and their triumphs, as though we're talking about real people as models from whom we might learn how to live our lives better. And that's probably has been the dominant strand of Shakespeare criticism over these hundreds of years. But another way of looking at the plays is to examine them in the context of larger philosophical concepts or issues. And one of those that has become kind of interesting in the 20th century is the idea of metadrama. The term meta being a Greek term, the Greek prefix indicating something that's above and looking over the object to be studied or to be discussed or analyzed. So the metadrama is something that comes up interestingly in Othello, and it's one of the ways to analyze the play and to make meaning from this play. Metadrama is then a critical term that became fashionable in the latter part of the 20th century in literary criticism, and it refers to aspects of a play that call attention to its status as a work of art itself, and aspects of the work that may invite reflection on the technical problems of communication and perception, or concerns about ethical issues of making literature, of making plays, of communicating, of interpreting, and of attempting to influence audiences with drama. And I'm going to describe some of the techniques that playwrights use, actors and directors use, that are metadramatic. One of the most common ones is breaking the fourth wall. If you go to a stage play, you're sitting in the audience, it's often dark in the audience and the stage is lit, and it feels as though you're a voyeur. It feels as though you're looking at people acting out their lives, however much a pretense it is, and you're not seen. You're the unseen observer. Now, historically, by the way, this construction of the proscenium arch stage, that's the term used for it, in which you have a lit stage and a dark audience, and there's a clear boundary separating the audience from the action on stage. Historically, that dates from, in England at least, from around 1660, from the restoration of Charles II as monarch. It's a new kind of theater at that time, and this kind of stage wasn't used by Shakespeare and his contemporaries. They used what's called an apron stage, a stage in which there might be candles lighting the stage, but the plays were performed in daytime, at least at the Globe and the other public theaters where Shakespeare's plays were performed. And the stage juts out into the audience. So you would have an audience on three sides of the actors. So the illusion that the audience is completely separate from the actors is broken down. But a metadramatic feature of more modern plays then, and more modern productions, is when an actor breaks the convention of the fourth wall and simply speaks to the audience directly instead of speaking to the other characters. And often the other characters may be standing still, pretending that they don't hear what's going on here. And you'll see this in contemporary movies. It's become quite fashionable since the 1980s. And you can probably remember some movies where this is done to good comic effect. Can anyone recall a movie where this is done? Which one? Okay, I'll have to watch that one. A very famous one from the 1980s was Ferris Bueller's Day Off. And it's often used to comic effect. But breaking the fourth wall has this metadramatic effect because it calls into question implicitly the audience's removal and objectivity, this illusion of objectivity that the audience has, the theater audience has, in watching something that's going on as though we are kind of scientific observers watching these characters act on stage. It suggests that the audience is in on something with the protagonist, with the person who's speaking to the audience, in on something and sharing secrets that the other actors are not privy to. So another one that I just mentioned is the soliloquy. This simply means talking to oneself. And Hamlet has several famous soliloquies, and sometimes it's presented as thinking out loud or the unspoken thoughts of the character. And other times, the soliloquy might be, as in Deadpool, I presume, and in Ferris Bueller's Day Off, speaking directly to the audience. Another metadramatic technique is to have one character who is dominating the action of the other characters. This character is sometimes called the surrogate dramatist. So this character, in effect, is acting as a playwright and as a director on his own terms. He's kind of like a rogue director, you might say. And this surrogate dramatist technique can invite comparison between the work of the director or the work of directing and playwriting in general, as opposed to, or in contrast to, the success or the failure of the character on stage who's acting as a director of action in his own little plays. And I want to point out to you many times where precisely Iago is doing that throughout Othello. Another aspect of the surrogate dramatist's action is that the surrogate dramatist may direct a sort of a play within the play. So in Hamlet, Hamlet stages a play within the play, presents this to his uncle / stepfather. He wants to spook his uncle into admitting that he actually murdered his real father. And he thinks if he presents a play on stage in which a brother kills his brother, that Claudius, his uncle / stepfather, will be so alarmed that by his body language and his reactions, he will reveal his guilt. Hamlet is setting up a scene in a play within the play. So that's a common metadramatic feature because it invites reflection on the act of and the business of making plays, making literature. Another metadramatic technique is the surveillance scene, in which the surrogate dramatist or the protagonist may manipulate a character or characters into a position of being spied upon, or may manipulate a character into spying upon other characters. In the 20th century, the classic films of Alfred Hitchcock, such as Rear Window and Psycho, have explored the surveillance scene as a way to suggest how in classic narrative cinema, we as viewers are always positioned somehow as complicit, viewing the actions of other people who don't know they're being watched. And that, for example, there is something inherently immoral or unseemly about the pleasure we may get from watching a classic Hollywood narrative film. In Psycho, Hitchcock sets up the movie audience so that we'll feel complicit with Norman Bates as he peeps through the wall to watch the woman taking a shower. The whole point is to make the viewing audience feel vaguely uncomfortable. We shouldn't be doing this. There's a landmark essay in feminist film criticism by Laura Mulvey called Visual Pleasures in Narrative Cinema that explores this phenomenon. Laura Mulvey suggests that this phenomenon of voyeurism is a key effect of traditional Hollywood cinema. With that, I'll conclude this webcast, but I'll have more to say about Othello in a subsequent installment. If you have questions or comments, send me an email.